let's learn to paint a jack-o'-lantern with watercolor and pen. Here we go. Let's paint a jack-o'-lantern. After you've sketched your pumpkin shape, we're going to create the glow that we'll be able to see through the eyes and mouth. I'm creating a yellowish circle with some orange along the edge, and then I'm using my scrubber brush to get rid of some of the yellow in the middle and show that white glow a little bit better. Once I've got a general change from light to dark with my yellows, I'm going to make sure that this dries before I paint my actual orange pumpkin. Once it's dry, I actually noticed I wanted a bit more white, so I'm getting my scrubber brush wet again, and I'm scrubbing away a little bit of white at the corners of the eyes and the top of the mouth to really make sure that center feels bright and glowing. Then I'm going to dry it again. Now that it's all dry, I can actually add my orange. Now I'm using not exactly an orange, it's actually more of a burnt umber, and it's a brown orange, so it's going to get a lot darker than a general bright orange. If you don't have this specific color, you can mix orange and brown together to make a nice orangey brown color. Now, of course, we'll do layers to really make it darker, so it won't be as dark as we want it in this first layer, but the first layer is going to be a wash, so try to keep it all nice and even, trying not to let any hard edges happen, so continuing your paint throughout the shape of the pumpkin. If your glow went beyond the edges of the pumpkin, that's okay, but this we're just trying to keep inside the lines that we drew for our pumpkin. So be a little bit more careful, especially going around the eyes and the mouth, because we can't cover up dark with light. So we're trying to leave those bright light spaces open and let the dark only be the shape of the pumpkin. Now, while it's still wet, I am going to drip in some shadows, especially in between the sections of my pumpkin. So I drew my pumpkin with pretty much 3 ovals, an oval in the middle and a kind of a half moon on either side. So along those places where they connect, I want to have some shadows. They're kind of like the creases or crevices of the pumpkin. So drip a little bit of shadow in while it's wet, but we'll add more definition once it's dry. I dried it part way, but I decided I wanted a bit more of the dark to blend in while it was still wet, so I stopped, and I'm going back to add a bit more shadow while it's still wet on wet so that those shadows can blend together smoothly. I will create some harder edges of shadows next, but it's really nice to have in your base layer a little bit of value change already. Now, some areas did dry a little bit, so there I'm kind of smudging away those lines, knowing that I want to do that in the next step, but trying to keep this general area smooth and blended. So I'm re-wetting the paper as I need to make sure those values blend together. Now that it's actually all dry, I can go back with a nice dark layer, which is just a more milky consistency of the same paint color. So I'm still using my burnt umber, and I'm going along the edges, along the bottom. I'm allowing my brush to create some texture lines. As you know, pumpkins do have a sort of texture or line on them. They're not perfectly round or smooth, so I'm letting this wet on dry lines show that texture, especially at the bottom and top where I'm creating shadow, and I'm letting the center have a bit more highlight, so I'm leaving that the lighter value. Now, one thing that will take our pumpkin to the next level is actually creating that inside edge of the carved out spaces. So I'm trying to water down my paint and create a light orange edge on the inside of the eyes and on the inside of the mouth. Now, to make it 3D, I need to pick a side and stick to it, which I did not do on the teeth, so I'm going to fix that later when I outline in pen. But pretty much all my shadows or my edges are on the left and the bottom. That way my whole pumpkin looks like it's from the same perspective. Next, we can't forget our stem, so I'm doing a wash of a dark brown, a different brown than my burnt umber, because I don't want the stem to be as orange as my pumpkin, and then when it dries I can go back and add texture to that stem. Now let's think about really making our pumpkin pop by doing a background. I am mixing some of my bright blue. Can't remember if this is a phthalo blue or something else, but it's very vibrant. And I mixed it with some purple to make it feel even darker or cooler, more like a night sky. So I'm going to put this purpley blue mixture very carefully around my pumpkin because I don't want these colors to blend. And I'm just going to scratch it out with some dry brush on the edges. I'm not worried about making an exact shape or filling the page completely since this is in my sketchbook, and I like that way the texture just kind of goes off to the edge. But you can of course end it however you want. Now this isn't quite as dark as I want it, so I'm going to go back and add another layer of my blue because my blue is especially vibrant. Hopefully I'll still have a bit of hint of purple, but this will make it even darker by doing a second layer on top of that first purpley blue mixture. Then I will want to add even darker value at the base where my pumpkin is sitting on the ground. I'm going to mix some browns with my blues to make that even darker and feel more like the surface of the ground or something that it's sitting on. Now you could leave it there, but I love to use pen in my illustrations, so I'm going to go back over the edges, adding a bit more texture, adding some definition and contrast to the lines that I drew originally in pencil, and making them show up on top of the paint with my black pen. This is a micron pen, so it's waterproof. If I need to go back and do any painting on top, it will not bleed. However, since we're drawing at the end, you could use any old black pen to do this outline. This will also help me emphasize the 3D-ness of the cutouts of the faces and add some more texture to the edges of the pumpkin. Now I'm also going to be using my white pen today, which is a gel pen. And this white pen will actually show up on top of paint, which is amazing because watercolor you usually can't do white. And I'm going to use it to make some stars in the sky since this jack-o'-lantern is sitting outside at night. I think that adds an extra special touch. And here we have it, a jack-o'-lantern. We made it glow by leaving those bright light colors in the center and going darker and darker all around them. Happy painting. See you next time.